Hello and welcome to the Ask N T Wright Anything podcast, the show where we answer your questions about Jesus, the Bible, and the life of faith. I'm Mike Bird from Ridley College in Melbourne, Australia.
And I'm Tom Wright from Oxford in England.
And we're going to keep answering your questions because you've sent us some fantastic ones. And no lack of controversy either, Tom. And our first one, I think, is exactly in the controversy fold. This is a question about the difficult subject of abortion. Now, this question comes from Sarah Mercer of Germany, land of my birth, Tom. I was born in Germany. And this is the topic. Why should Christians defend life from the moment of conception? Why should Christians oppose abortion and stand up for the protection of unborn life? As a Christian, I was taught that abortion is a sin, regardless of the stage of pregnancy, because it violates the fifth commandment, you shall not murder. But here is my struggle. Although I have heard this argumentation many times, it somehow doesn't feel intuitive to me. Why do we believe that it is murder to abort, especially at an early stage of pregnancy when the fetus is not even formed, the heart is not beating yet, etc.? It seems very abstract to me to say that from the moment of conception, when only two cells have met, there is life. That is just as valuable as any human being on earth. As a student, I am sometimes confronted with this issue, for example, when I come across demonstrations for women's rights on campus. And I always find it difficult because I know that as a Christian, I should be against abortion. But as I said, I often don't feel that intuitively. Also, there are these difficult ethical questions, such as what about cases where the pregnancy is a result of rape, or cases where a decision has to be made whether the mother or the unborn child should be saved. I would be grateful if you could help me to better understand the Christian reasoning on this issue. And Tom, I think we have to agree this is a difficult issue. There's a whole bunch of ethical things we've got to kind of navigate our way around. It's not a black and white issue because, you do have things like ectopic pregnancies and what you do in cases of incest that leads to pregnancy and stuff like that. So, Tom, do you have anything you want to share with Sarah?
Yeah. It is obviously hugely sensitive and difficult. And I know it's become a political hot potato as well as an ethical hot potato, particularly in America for some reason. I suspect this partly has to do with the fact that in the 50s, 60s and 70s, when the so-called sexual revolution was happening and people were casting off older restraint, many people said, well, it doesn't matter if we have sex outside marriage because if we conceive a child, we can always have an abortion. In other words, the reaction against abortion was partly to do with the reaction against people having sex with multiple partners whenever they wanted and not caring because we can always sort that out with an abortion, can't we? And I think many people, including many devout Christians, from then on just thought, abortion, that's to do with the breakdown of family standards, with the breakdown of traditional Christian values as a whole. It became a symbol of that amoral society that was suddenly springing up, particularly in the 60s. Now, I understand that reaction. But then when it's presented as you are murdering an unborn child, I think we do have to be very, very careful. And I've had personal experience of this with a close family member where soon after the couple discovered that they were pregnant, or the wife was pregnant, then it also became apparent that the wife had been accidentally exposed to German measles, rubella. Now, as we know, that exposure to German measles can result in serious deformities in the womb, etc., etc. And the GP in that case, who was a devout Christian GP, said, we're going to do the tests, and if she has been exposed to rubella, if there's a threat of serious defamation or whatever, then we will recommend termination. And I remember my heart in my mouth when I heard that and thinking, do I really agree with that? But at the time, it was absolutely clear for the mental health, never mind anything else, of the mother and the potential father as well, that this was the way to go. In fact, all was well. the rubella had not actually done what it sometimes might do, and that child was born perfectly healthy and has grown up now, etc. This was a long time ago. But that made me very sensitive about the fact that there are many, many cases where it is about the mother's health versus the health of the child or whatever. And particularly that, as you cited, in cases of rape or in cases of incest, there may be a very, very strong argument for saying this ought never to have happened, and with sorrow, because we do not want to do this in principle, but with sorrow and a bit of shame, the best thing to do is as soon as possible to terminate this pregnancy. Now, I've seen the debates. I've read books about the debates as to at what point it's okay, or at what point it becomes not okay. And I know that in my own country, people have pushed for the legislation to be allowed to say right up to the moment before the woman is ready to give birth, that if they decide for whatever reason on an abortion, then that's okay. And that I find not only wrong but repulsive, because if you wait till the child's been born and then say, well, we didn't really want a girl this time, so we'll just get rid of her, then that would be a criminal act, and quite rightly so. That would be murder, and it would be a pagan thing. This is something we must never forget, that in the ancient world, people regularly, when they had a child they didn't want, especially if it was a girl, they left that poor child out for the wolves or the gypsies or whoever to take and do with what they wanted. The early Judeans didn't do that. The early Christians didn't do that because they valued every human being. Likewise, there were techniques of abortion in the ancient world. In fact, quite often when a woman was pregnant and the father didn't want that woman to be pregnant, the father might insist that the woman should have an abortion, which in those days was possible but often very dangerous. They would take certain drugs or have certain rather invasive medical procedures, and it makes me shudder at the thought of it. In other words, all that sort of thing went on in the ancient pagan world, and the Judeans and the Christians wouldn't have anything to do with it. Thank you very much. And I think that shows us the way, that in principle, this is not something which we should welcome. It is not something which we should collude with. At the same time, there may be certain exceptions, of which severe deformity might be one, of which certainly incest and rape would be others. And in those cases, I would say the sooner the better, because at a certain point, and I am not medically qualified to say at what point I would draw a line, then this is a viable human being that should then be cherished. And I know from experience with my own children before they were born of being aware that they were aware in the womb of noises, of pressure, of all sorts of things. And that the more we know about psychology, the more it really does appear that some of the impressions which are given to this child in the womb will re-emerge as their children and as they grow up. So we're not just talking about some inert lump of matter which we can just get rid of as we please. So the whole debate about the woman's rights, it's very difficult. It's very hard for a man to talk about this. And indeed, one of the problems has been, particularly in the Roman Catholic Church, when women, particularly say a girl who's been raped or who's had incest committed on her, then discovering that unmarried men from the Catholic hierarchy are telling her what she can and can't do. You know, that's as people now say, the optics of that are pretty bad. That's part of the same system of male bullying, which we have to avoid like the plague. However, having said that, I do think that sense of respect for God's creation in all its rich variety is the primary starting point, even if we then have to say with sorrow and a certain sense of this is the least worst option in this situation, that there may be some cases of exceptions. That's about as far as I can get at the moment. And as I say, I'm very much aware of just how sensitive this topic is politically, sociologically, as well as ethically.
I think that's a good way to put it, Tom. Christians and Jews have traditionally been pro-life. I mean, that's why we normally reject the death penalty. That's why we oppose, euthanizing our grandparents the minute they start losing the keys to the car. This is why we don't like the idea of, doing horrible procedures that will hurt human
Yeah.
beings.
Yeah.
And in some jurisdictions, it's horrible to think they're even talking about infanticide, because people have pointed out, I mean, if you're going to have abortion all the way up to birth, how does
Exactly.
going 6 inches down the birth canal really change anything
Yeah.
legally? So
Quite.
it seems so arbitrary. And I think there are some philosophers like, Peter Singer, who is
Yeah.
one among many, who have argued for the legitimacy not just of late-term abortion, but even infanticide,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which for me really is a symbol of moving from a Christian age back to a neo-pagan
Yeah.
world. But Tom, yeah, like I
Absolutely.
said, yeah, it really is a difficult topic, and we can't assume that this is a black and white answer when every case is going to be somehow
Sure.
different.
Sure.